You're listening to the Real Estate Way to Wealth and Freedom podcast, episode 1.
And in '06, my net worth went up $17 million. And, I did the math on that. It's like, for those of you listening, it's about $3,500 an hour. So I got a head so big I could barely get it through a door.
Welcome to the Real Estate Way to Wealth and Freedom podcast with Jacob Ayers, providing actionable content to help you along your journey to financial freedom through real estate investing. As the premier asset class, real estate has helped ordinary people just like you amass fortunes. The benefits of passive income from real estate investing will allow you to live a life you want. And now your host, entrepreneur, real estate investor, and apartment deal syndicator, Jacob Ayers.
Hi, and welcome to the Real Estate Way to Wealth and Freedom podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Ayers. Today I want to thank you for tuning in to the very first true episode of this podcast, where we're going to be discussing the psychology of successful real estate investing with Rod Khleif. Rod is a real estate investor, entrepreneur, multiple business owner, author, mentor, peak performance coach, and community philanthropist who is passionate about business, life, success, and ultimately giving back. As one of the country's top real estate investors, Rod has personally owned and managed over 2,000 apartments and homes. Rod is also the author of How to Create Lifetime Cash Flow Through Multifamily Properties, which is considered to be an essential textbook for aspiring and experienced multifamily investors. As a community philanthropist, Rod founded and directs the Tiny Hands Foundation, which has benefited more than 45,000 community children in need. Rod has a compelling rags to riches story where he has soared from humble beginnings as a young, impoverished Dutch immigrant to incredible success today. Rod's experience involves both remarkable triumphs and spectacular failures, which he affectionately calls seminars. Today I welcome on the show Rod. Hi Rod, how are you?
Oh, I'm fantastic, Jacob. Thanks for having me on the show, buddy.
Great, absolutely. I hope you're doing okay down there in Sarasota, Florida, right?
It's paradise. Life is every day I get up and I'm grateful that I'm no longer in the cold. So
good. Well, that's great. Rod, could you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your background?
Sure. Happy to. So I immigrated to this country when I was 6 years old. My mom and my brother and I, and we didn't have much money. We ended up in Denver, Colorado, where I lived for the next 30 years. And my mom made money by babysitting, and she babysat a bunch of kids. And the way I got into real estate was my mom ended up buying the house across the street from us when I was 14 years old. And I remember she paid somewhere in the 30s, I think it was low 30s for the house. And then when I graduated from high school, or when I was 17, just actually before I graduated from high school, she told me it was worth in the mid 50s. And although I flunked basic math, I was able to do that calculation, and I decided I'm getting into real estate. And so I got my real estate license, didn't make much money the first couple of years, but then I started buying houses in Denver and ultimately ended up buying over 500 houses in Denver in a buy and hold strategy. And it's painful to even think about because I wouldn't recommend that to anyone. I did have apartment buildings as well. Ended up buying a couple of hundred houses in Memphis, Tennessee, and a couple of apartment buildings there, and then ended up in Florida, where I bought over 13, maybe 1,400 houses, and again, apartment communities there as well. And I was really excited because in 2006, I had 800 houses and some apartment complexes here in Florida, and in '06, my net worth went up $17 million. And, I did the math on that. It's like, for those of you listening, it's about $3,500 an hour. So I got a head so big I could barely get it through a door. And you know how it is when you get a big head, God or the universe has a habit of smacking you down. And for me, that was 2008. And so I got crushed in 2008. I'd over leveraged a little bit. And real estate here in Florida, taxes and insurance are so high that it can impact your cash flow. And so, I imploded in 2008. But what was interesting was my multifamily did just fine. And it of course there was a contraction and there was a pullback, but it would have survived just fine if I hadn't cross-collateralized with all my single-family houses and everything. And so I realized that, had I to do it again, I would do it just in multifamily, which is that's actually the whole purpose behind my podcast, Lifetime Cash Flow Through Real Estate Investing, is to tell people that if they're going to buy and hold long-term hold real estate, it's my suggestion that they focus on multifamily or other higher cash flowing assets than single family. Single family is great for wholesaling and flipping, but as it relates to long-term hold, I wouldn't do it, and I don't recommend people do it based on my personal experience. It's just a tough way to eke it out, and I'll tell you some other reasons. Not just that taxes and insurance are much higher, but logistically, it's much more challenging. I mean, if you can imagine, my example is kind of extreme. I had 800 houses in Florida, and I had them two hours one direction and 2 hours the other direction, everywhere in between. So you can just imagine showing houses. Okay, you've got to drive an hour and a half to show a house, or 2 hours to show a house. What if they don't show up? Or maintenance. Let's say you want to fix a property. You send a maintenance man. He's got to go to the house. He's got to determine what's wrong. Then he's got to find the nearest Lowe's or Home Depot, go get the materials, go back to the house. Chances are he'll need something else, so he's got to go back and get it. And so that's very, very expensive. Versus, having 30 or 40 or 20 or 10, just a number of units in the same location, and chances are the mechanical will all be the same in an apartment complex. It's going to be the same, typically the same air conditioners, same furnaces. Plumbing parts will be the same. And when you have single family houses, every one of them is different. And so very, very expensive maintenance prospect in single family homes for a long-term hold as well. So besides being logistically and management intensive and much harder. So that's why my focus now is multifamily. And, that was a $50 million, I call them seminars. I don't call them failures. That was a $50 million seminar for me in 2008 when it all imploded. Now,
wow.
Yeah. So I on my podcast I love to talk about the psychology of success because, as you know, Jacob, 80% of your success in anything is your psychology. And if you'd like, I'm happy to expand on that a little bit for you.
Absolutely.
But okay. Well, so. For those of you listening that want to get into real estate or want to get into anything, even if you determine real estate's not your game, but you're listening because Jacob's a great guy and his content's fantastic. But let's say you want to be a success at something. You have to get your head right, and you have to have the proper mindset because, like I said, it's 80% of it. So I'm going to give you some examples from my own life as to how I motivated myself, because invariably life is going to throw speed bumps at you, and you're going to have some setbacks. You're going to have adversity. You may even have some failures or seminars, as I call them.
Right.
But if you've got your head right, you'll get through them. So let me give you some examples. So when I first got into real estate, I thought to be a real estate, and I got my broker's license when I was 18. Didn't make very much money. I put a bus bench down at the end of the street with my picture on it. And the only value that got was it made my mom real proud, but it didn't give me any business. But I also went out and bought a 4-door Ford Granada, and I thought that's what realtors had to have. Official looking 4-door car. It was the ugliest thing you've ever seen, but that's what I thought brokers needed. But I always wanted something nicer, and the guy that I worked with, a broker, had a Corvette, and he let me drive it, and I just thought that was the coolest thing ever. So what I did is I went out and I got a picture of that Corvette, and they didn't have the internet back then. I got it out of a magazine, and I taped it to the visor of my 4-door Granada. And within a couple of years, I had a beautiful burgundy Corvette. Now, the examples I'm going to give you here, Jacob, and your listeners are not. I'm not trying to brag at all, because the things that I'm going to tell you here in the next few minutes don't even motivate me anymore. But they give you a great example of the power of visualization and then goal setting, which I'll talk about next. It's very, very important, in my opinion, to visualize what it is you want. So I had this Corvette then, and then there was a TV show back then, and this was probably before you were even born, Jacob, but it was called Magnum PI, and the actor was Tom Selleck, and he had this Ferrari 308, beautiful red Ferrari. You remember that? Okay, so I thought that was the coolest thing. So I got a picture of that car, and I put it on the visor of my Corvette. A year or two later, I had a Maserati that looked just like that Ferrari from the front end. Now, my last car example is I always wanted a Lamborghini. I'm the guy, that had the posters on the wall in his bedroom when I was growing up, with the girls in the bikinis and the beautiful Lamborghinis. Back then, they were called the model was a Countach, I remember. And what was amazing is, of course, I had pictures of them as well. And what's amazing is my son, who was 10 at the time, collected models of exotic cars because he was really into them as well. And he had a model of the same color and style Lamborghini that I ended up buying, which I wrecked, by the way, which is another story. But visualization works, guys. In fact, I'll tell you, I've got my planner right here in front of me. If you could see it, I could show you. But in my planner, I have pictures that have been in here in the back of this thing, put in plastic, that have been here for 17, 18 years. And I've got the first few pages are gratitude pictures. They're pictures of my children and things that I'm grateful for. But then I've got pictures of the houses that I've wanted, the cars that I've wanted, the watches that I've wanted. And what's astounding is I have obtained 3/4 of these things, and they're still in my book. I wish I could show you to prove it to you because I'm literally leafing through them right now. But I've gotten these things. So those of you listening, there's two things I'm going to tell you here. And that is, one, know what it is you want, number one. Decide what it is you want. I kind of got the cart before the horse in this conversation because I talked about visualizing, but you really need to goal set first. And I recommend that you write down the things that you want. I take people through a goal setting workshop in some of my courses and coaching where I tell them to take the lid off their mind and write down everything that they could ever possibly want in life. And just everything, big, small, who you want to help, the houses you want, the cars you want, the watches, the motorcycles, the boats, the jet skis, whatever it is. Write all those things down. Who you want to do things for. I remember taking my parents and my wife's parents on a cruise. I bought them a car, I bought them a house, my parents. Things like that. Write all that down. Write down everything you could ever possibly want to learn, places you want to go. Then when you're done with that, I recommend you put a number by each one of those goals as to how many years it's going to take you to achieve them. You write a 1, a 3, a 5, a 10, or even a 20. And remember one thing, that people typically underestimate what they can do in a year, or overestimate, rather. I got that reversed. Overestimate what they can do in a year, but grossly underestimate what they can do in a decade. So I highly recommend you do this. Write the numbers by each goal, and then and let me back up again for a second. I don't know if you if your listeners or you are familiar with a term called the reticular activating system. And what it is I'll describe it. I'll give you an example of it actually, because your brain is always filtering out thousands of things every moment of the day. Like if I tell you to focus on what your feet feel like right now, then you can focus on it. But your brain is ignoring that because it's focusing on what you're listening to or what you're looking at.
Right.
That's your reticular activating system's work. And an example of it would be if you've ever bought a car, you never really noticed that car before you bought it, but then once you buy it, you see them everywhere. That's an example of it. And that's why the power of writing your goals down is so critical. And so, you have to do it. If those of you listening, you want to get into this business or any business, you want to be a success financially, you have to write your goals down. So write your goals down. But besides writing the goals down, like I just said, and putting a number by each one, I'm going to tell you, after you've done that, take your top 4 one-year goals and write those down. Now, that's important. What you just did is very, very important, and you'll be ahead of 90% of the people out there if you've just done that. But if you really want to maximize this, do the next couple of steps that I'm going to tell you now. Okay. For each one of those one-year goals, write a paragraph why it's an absolute must, why you have to achieve that goal in a year. So, and use emotional charged language, like, because I'll feel fantastic, because I'll Use words like awesome, fantastic, whatever charges you as to why it's a must. But don't just stop with the positive reasons why it's a must. Also write some negative ones down. Like, for example, if I don't, I'll feel like a failure, or I'll feel like I left my family down. Put some pain in there too, because people will do more to avoid pain than gain pleasure. So include positive and negative reasons why you have to achieve those goals. Then the last step is get pictures. Go on Google, find pictures that resonate with you, maybe juice you emotionally as it relates to each one of those goals. If you look here in my office here at work, or my office at home, or my exercise room, you will see pictures of the things that I want now, things that juice me now. And like I just gave you my example of my planner, I'm old school. I still have a day timer. It's called a Franklin Covey planner now. It was called a day timer.
I'm familiar with them.
But they're real old school. But I've got these pictures in here. Like I said, I've gotten 3/4 of these things. The Rolls Royce, the Lamborghini, I got all that stuff I've gotten because I focused on it. So those of you listening, what you focus on, you get. So make sure it's positive. Make sure it's what you want, because if you focus on the negative, you're going to get more of that. But those are my suggestions for getting your mind right. Get your goals, get your whys, get pictures of your goals, put them in front of you where you see them every day. And I'm telling you, they will manifest. That's just the way it works. Focus on them. And I'll give you one last little tip as it relates to goals. I had always wanted to live on the beach. I lived in Denver, and I always, I saw palm trees, or we'd go to Los Angeles, and I'd go to the beach, and I always wanted to live on the beach. And I finally ended up building this magnificent home, on 10,000 square foot home on the beach. I owned the beach on one side here in Sarasota, and I had boat docks on the backside. It was called Gulf to Bay. And I'm floating in the pool of this place, this testament to my ego. I'm looking up at it at night, and I got depressed. And I'm like, what the hell's going on? I've always wanted this. I mean, this magnificent home, waterfall from the second floor into the pool. I mean, just spectacular place. But I was depressed. And so what I realized at the time is there were two things going on. I didn't know it at the time, but when I look back on it, I realized it. I'm sorry. There are two things going on. One is, as it relates to your goals, make sure that if you're about to achieve a big one, that you have other ones lined up. Because like the good book says, without a vision, the people perish. You need a vision for the future. And I didn't have a vision for the future because I was like, now what do I do? What's next? And that's one of the reasons I was depressed. The second reason that I found out after spending a lot of time with Tony Robbins, I've followed him around for about 16 years, is that there's a big difference between success and fulfillment. And so I'll tell your listeners, success is very, very important, and so is giving back or being fulfilled. And most people get fulfillment from giving back. And so, I was kind of a narcissist up to that point. It was all Rod, me. What I realized was life is about giving back. And so, again, thanks to Tony, I started feeding families back in 2000. I went out and I fed 5 families for Thanksgiving, it was. And one of the families, the lady came out. She started crying when she saw the food that we brought for the holidays, and her 5 kids came out, and they all started crying. And then I started crying. And then, so the next year I did 50 families. The year after that I did 100, and I doubled it every year. And I'm blessed to say we have helped over 50,000 children for the holidays. And again, I don't say that to brag, because there's lots of ways you can give back. And I will mention that we also do backpacks filled with school supplies. And any of you listening can go out and spend $100 and buy a couple of backpacks and some school supplies and drop them off at a school and have them give them to whoever needs them the most. We've done, blessed to do thousands of them. We've done thousands of teddy bears to the local police departments for the officers to put in their vehicles when they encounter a child that's experienced a traumatic event. But those of you listening, even if you haven't bought a property yet or you haven't started your business yet, there's nothing to stop you from just giving back and deciding to smile at everybody you see today, or adding value in some way that it doesn't necessarily mean money. It can just be your time to give back, because like Tony Robbins says, there's a science to achievement and there's an art to fulfillment, and you need to make sure you're fulfilled. There's nothing worse and I know them. I know billionaires and mega millionaires that are very, very successful, but they're not fulfilled, so they're not happy. So I say focus on success, but don't forget about the fulfillment piece.
Absolutely, Rod. That is some of the greatest advice I think the listeners could have heard in a long time. And what you're saying about writing down your goals and visualizing your successes, it's all very true. I've started writing down my goals just a few short years ago, and just the different mindset you see and the successes you realize just from writing those down and constantly being in the front of your mind is astounding. And then what I always preach is what you're saying. Just, at the end of the day, you have to have an important reason why, because, accumulating
because you're going to get your butt kicked. That's why, Jacob. You're going to get knocked down. You're going to get bloodied. You're going to have that wall thrown up in front of you. And if you don't have a strong enough why, you won't go around the wall. You won't go over the wall, or you won't go through the wall. You've got to have a strong why. Absolutely. Yeah. So you're absolutely right. And I'm here to tell you, like I said, I told you about, I've had lots of seminars, and some of that 08 was my biggest at 50 million, but I've had lots of smaller ones. And, it's the why that keeps you going. It's the why that gets you up jump out of bed in the morning. It's most people are visual. So get the pictures, take the time to do it. I can't tell you how important. I know it sounds foofy. I know it does, but I'm telling you it works. If you could see my planner here, and I've had all these things. I don't have the yacht yet, but someday I want a yacht. And again, a lot of the stuff I want to do more for people. I want to build schools in Latin America. There's things I've changed a lot of, and these things change over the years. Your whys change and your goals change. But if you don't, it's like, what's a good example? I mean, if you don't know what it is you want, you're never going to get it, because you're not going to recognize it when it pops up in front of you. And if you write it down, you write those whys down, when you see things that can propel you towards those things, your brain will subconsciously realize it. You may not even realize it consciously, and you'll take action. And you have to take action, obviously, but there are a lot of people that listen that are very analytical, and they'll study this, they'll read the books, they'll take the courses. But by the way, I have a book for your listeners. It's a multifamily real estate book, 200 pages. There's no fluff. I mean, it is total content. I've had rave reviews, and I'm going to give it to your listeners for free. All they have to do is text my name, Rod, to 41411, and we'll put them on the list for the book. And it's like I said, it's pure content, no fluff. It's like a textbook for multifamily investing. Literally everything from, picking a market to picking a property to, everything through the process of buying it, developing the relationships, finding the money, financing it, managing it, everything. So it's
great. Thank you, Rod, for
true
that
value. My pleasure. And it's titled, what is the title? How to Create Lifetime Cash Flow Through Multifamily Properties. And then the subtitle is, I'll mention for a minute, is the New Rules of Real Estate Investing. And for me and for anybody listening, the new rules are focus on cash flow. I have my students, coaching students, or people that are getting my course that will email me a listing, and they'll say, well, yeah, it sold for $2 million 5 years ago, and I can get it for $800,000. And I say, I don't care. What's the cash flow? What's it gonna? What's the NOI? What's the return? What can you expect once you have debt on it? Because that's what matters. Because ultimately, we're going into another contraction, and if you're focused on value, you're going to get crushed. You need to focus on cash flow. So there's a chapter in the book about that, and I highly recommend those of you thinking about multifamily. It's free, so you can't get a better price than that. Check it out and get some value.
Great, thank you for that. I think those words of wisdom coming from someone like you with your experiences carries a lot of weight. So you have to be focused on cash flow, and you can't be only focused on value, because as you've seen, even with a large successful single family home and multifamily business, in the downturns, that just won't carry you through. So great advice. So Rod, let's back up here for a second. So you've got your broker's license at 18 years old. You started buying single family houses, and you've bought an enormous amount of houses. I mean, when you hear the numbers of 500, 1,300, 200 units, your mind automatically gravitates towards multifamily properties, because that's just what makes sense. But you did that with single families. How did you build such a large business through single family homes with that kind of magnitude?
Well, I'll tell you how. I did what other people aren't willing to do. And those of you listening, if you want success, do what other people aren't willing to do. In Denver, I went out and knocked on doors of people that were in foreclosure. And I did it every night for almost a decade. And that's not true. I exaggerated. Probably about 6 or 7 years. But every night I was out, Monday through Friday. I was out knocking on doors in my little Subaru Brat, ugliest little pickup truck you've ever seen, knocking on doors and buying houses. And that's what I did, because most people aren't willing to do that. But in today's day and age, the resources you've got available, I will tell you, go get a list of property owners, mail them. If you're doing multifamily, I recommend that you go to the Secretary of State's office, find out, who owns the LLC that owns the property, and drill down and get the owner's name of the LLC and mail them. And if you want to take it to another step, pick up the phone and call them. Hey, Have you ever thought about selling? That's how to do what other people aren't willing to do. And very few people will do that because they don't like the rejection. But all they can say is, no, I'm not interested in selling. Okay, well, you mind if I call you in a year to see where you're at then? No? Okay, boom, and start a database. And I have a client that bought a 30-unit apartment complex by mailing 300 handwritten letters. Nobody does that. Who writes a handwritten letter? This couple did it in Houston. They bought it. They bought a fantastic deal. They've got $10,000 a month in cash flow. Once they stabilize it, they'll have $10,000 a month in net cash flow, because they wrote 300 letters. There you go. So that's how I did it, by doing what other people aren't willing to do. And that's what I recommend to your listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. Great advice. Great stuff.
Thank you.
So what are some of the current projects you're working on now, Rod? You've expanded in the multifamily space. You've got a large business. What are your current projects looking like?
It's funny. A couple of things, actually. We are actively looking at, I'm focused now more on smaller apartment solutions, because the bigger complexes, there's so much competition and so many people hot after those deals. I'm in the 40 and under space, and I'm also looking at mobile home parks. I love mobile home parks, and my family and friends are big in that space, and I'm getting into that space. So I've had a team in the Philippines for the last 6 months, honing mailing lists in multiple states. And getting phone numbers and all that. And we're going to do an outbound call campaign, and we're going to do all the things I just described for your listeners to find deals. And that's what I recommend. And then the other thing is I've taken hundreds of free calls from my listeners on my podcast, and many have asked me to mentor, coach, or do course. And so I finally broke down and I did it. And I can humbly say I've got the best multifamily course in the business. That will go live here in a couple of weeks, depending on when this airs. It's April now, but probably in a month or so, in max, it'll go live. And so that's the other big project I'm on, is helping
awesome.
people achieve lifetime cash flow, like yourself.
Do you want to give us a little teaser about that program?
Well, I can just tell you it's. I've done most of the courses out there, and I can humbly say it's I think it's the best out there, and I can say that with confidence. And it'll also include coaching and accountability and software and on and on and on. I mean, it's just a real quality product, and it's really meant to get somebody from nothing to owning property very, very quickly. So. That's how I geared it, and I incorporate a lot of the psychology of success, because, like I can say ad nauseum, you can know the mechanical stuff, you can know how to do real estate, but if you haven't got the mindset to take action, it'll never happen. And so, I spend a lot of time on that and helping people deal with the inevitable setbacks and obstacles. So there's a lot of that content in there as well. On my podcast, I do two segments every week. One is an interview segment like you're doing with me here, and I interview experts in the space as well. And then the second segment is a little clip called Your Driving Force Success clip. Your Driving Force Success tip, where I talk about the psychology of success. And I do that every week, and I think that's been really well received, and one of the reasons that we're over 1 million downloads now. So. I believe people really appreciate and realize that mindset is such a huge piece of success in anything.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've talked a lot about the psychology of success, from goal setting, visualization, and developing your reasons why. Now, next, when you've got all those things down, you're ready to begin your investing journey. I think it's really important to start surrounding yourself with the right people and building a team around you. Now, I'm sure you have plenty of experience. You've talked about your team in the Philippines, and I'm sure you've got a great team here in the U.S. Could you talk a little bit about the importance of building teams and how you've built yours and how they've contributed to your success?
Sure. The real estate is not a one-person game. If you want real success in real estate, or in my opinion, in any business, it's a team sport. And so, if you're brand new to this business, start by going to your local meetups and your local RIA groups and meet people and get out there and talk about what you're doing and develop relationships. What components do you need on your team? Of course, you need to develop relationships with brokers and hopefully try to get off-market deals, which is going to be hard to do in this market today, because if you haven't closed on a deal, they typically won't give you the time of day. But develop those relationships, nurture those relationships, be responsive if they send you a deal, even if you're not going to take it down, tell them why. So that's number one. Number two, you certainly want a real estate attorney on your team, or one that you can consult with a transactional attorney that can help you write offers. If you're going to write anything bigger than a 4-unit, you definitely want an attorney to write the contract. And then, I have on my team, I've got a CFO, CPA that handles my investor relations, because we do a fund as well to buy property, and so he handles that. He's a CPA, and you need someone that can handle your accounting, but you can outsource that. You can. There are lots of outsourced solutions for bookkeeping and accounting, but you want a good CPA, particularly if you start getting into multifamily, because there's some fantastic tax benefits. You can cost segregate a property and maximize your depreciation your first few years, which is fantastic. Saved me $600,000 last year. You can do 1031 exchanges, but you need people on your team to help you with that. But I think more than anything else, as it relates to team, is if you're brand new, what's great about multifamily, particularly commercial multifamily, those of you listening, anything 2 to 4 unit is residential, and it has its advantages and disadvantages. Anything 5+ units is commercial multifamily. As it relates to commercial multifamily, what's beautiful about those is the bank will look at the team. They won't just look at an individual player. If you've got 2 or 3 people on a team. So if, for instance, if you don't have the income or you don't have the credit, bring some people in on the team and put a team together that can take down the property. And so that's one of the big advantages with commercial. Now, there's the advantages with residential. For those of you that are brand new, it's a great way to start residential, because low down payments, 30-year fixed financing. You can get into these properties very low down, get fantastic financing, live in 1 unit. I've got people I've interviewed on my show that have 100 units that did it over 10 years, mega $1 million portfolio, 1 duplex or 4plex at a time. So don't minimize the advantages of smaller multifamily. But that said, there's some big advantages with commercial multifamily. The other big advantage with commercial multifamily is it's valued based on the net operating income. Residential multifamily 2 to 4 units is valued based on comparable sales.
Right. So
you really have no control over increasing the value, other than maybe doing some cosmetic improvements to make yours a little better than the one that's sold down the street. But with commercial multifamily, anything you do that improves your net operating income, which is your gross income less your expenses, that's your NOI, net operating income. Anything you do that improves that number exponentially improves the value, because then you multiply that NOI by a cap rate, and that determines your value. So literally, I could give you examples where you can, I'll give you a big example just because it's a wow factor, but in a 100-unit complex, if you do, and I don't have a calculator here in front of me to do this exactly, but if you do a $20 rent increase, or you, for example, bill back some of the utilities and do a $20 per unit improvement to the NOI, it can equate to a $400,000 improvement in the value of the property. So it's really exponential. And so without going into a math lesson here, I won't explain the detail of that. But the bottom line is you can impact the value of commercial multifamily just by improving the NOI, by increasing rents or decreasing expenses. And so you really control the improvement of the value, which is a huge advantage.
Right. Just the way multifamily is valued, like you're saying, it's a different animal than your single family and 2 to 4 unit multifamily properties. And you can go in the property and force appreciation is what it's called. So yeah, it's a phenomenal thing, and it's kind of where the power lies in multifamily investing.
Yep.
All right, Rod. So you've built a great, huge, successful real estate business. You've got a beautiful home down on the beach in Sarasota, Florida. What does the future hold for you? What are your future goals?
Well, actually, that home I was talking about was a casualty of my divorce. But I have an equally beautiful compound, which serendipitously looks out over the old home I used to own. But the future for me is really about helping other people succeed in this business. I get so much pleasure out of it. I got 2 thank you cards today. I mean, I get so much pleasure out of adding value and giving back. And that, again, that may sound a little foofy, but it's reality. And any of you that have experienced contribution and giving back know what I'm talking about. So that's really what's in the cards for me, is to help a lot of other people achieve success. I mean, we're actively buying. I mean, I'm like I say, I've got a fund, and we're actively looking for small multifamily and mobile home parks. But my greatest joy comes from giving back, which is, I know, the reason you did this as well, Jacob. And my hat's off to you at your age to realize, what's important in life. So good for you.
Thank you very much, Rod.
Yeah.
Okay, so wrapping up here, I've got a lightning round of a series of questions, and a disclaimer to the audience: Rod was not given these questions beforehand, so we're really going to blindside him here and see how he does. So, you ready, Rod?
Sure.
Okay, so starting out, what was your biggest hurdle getting started in real estate investing, and how did you overcome it? Confidence.
It's really funny. I made about 10 grand my first year and about 15 grand my second year, but then my third year I was in the 100,000, 120,000 range, and the only difference between year 1 and year 3 was confidence, and that confidence came from competence. Okay, and competence came from drinking through a fire hose. I learned everything I could about real estate. I learned how to sell. I learned all the nuances of real estate. And so I studied it. I read books. I followed my broker around. And that competence equated to confidence, which ultimately developed into intuition. And once you have intuition, then you can look at something and know almost instantly if it's a good deal, particularly in single family. In multifamily, of course, you need to do analysis, but in single family, I could walk in a house and in 30 seconds know if it was a good deal. And that comes from competence, which equates to confidence, which ultimately equates to intuition. So that's my answer. And those of you listening, you want to do that. You want to learn this business. Don't be a dabbler. Dabblers get crushed. So get my book or get somebody else's book, take a course, get a mentor or a coach or whatever it takes to really learn this business. Now, don't get caught in analysis paralysis. Take action. But that's where that confidence and intuition comes from, is from competence.
Fantastic. Great. Okay, if you were starting over with no education or capital, how would you start investing in real estate?
I would learn everything I could about real estate so I could speak congruently. I would go talk to people and say, hey, I'm finding these deals. I'd develop an elevator pitch. I'd say, I'm finding these deals, which is how I started in Denver, by the way. I bought 500 houses with other people's money. I gave them half the deal. I ended up buying them out, but I did it with other people's money. I didn't use my own money. I can't say I didn't always. I put them on credit cards initially as well. But I would go and I'd get the knowledge to develop, again, the confidence, the competence, and the ability to influence. And then I'd go talk to people and say, hey, I'm finding these deals, and I'm always looking for partners or investors. Do you know anybody that might be interested? And boom, and I'd find the money, and then I'd have the money to go do the deals.
Great, that's good advice. Okay, so can you share a personal habit that contributes to your success?
I write down. I plan my day every night before I go to bed in my big old planner here that's got the pictures in the back of it. That's a habit. I plan my week every Sunday afternoon. I look back at the previous week and I look at my successes and I celebrate those little successes. I'm like, hey, good job, Rod, because you have to do that because you're going to get kicked in the teeth. So you got to celebrate the wins so that when you get kicked in the teeth, you keep moving forward. And so those are two big habits. I'll give you one other habit that I recommend to your listeners, and that is having a little morning ritual. Every morning, I either do this in bed or I'll sit at my chair. And this takes 5 minutes. And some of you may be going, oh, this is foofy again. But I'm just telling you, when you hear it, you may say that. But I'm telling you, it is so powerful. I sit there for a minute. I take a deep breath, close my eyes, and I think about what I'm grateful for. My wife, my children, my successes, my beautiful home, whatever. I just think about what I'm grateful for. Then I think about what I want, my goals, as if I already have them with gratitude. So I'll sit and think about the things that I want, and I'll say thank you, with gratitude. And then lastly, I'll decide that it's going to be an awesome day that day, and it typically is. So I highly recommend that morning ritual. Some people meditate, some people do prayer. That's my morning ritual, and it's very, very effective. I literally try never to miss it.
Great, that's fantastic. Rod, can you share an internet resource that you find valuable, something maybe along the lines of like a Bigger Pockets?
Yeah, I compete with them every day for number one spot in real estate on iTunes. So I don't want to use them as an example. No, I'm just kidding. They're fantastic. They have a ton of value to add. They're the 800-pound gorilla in the space. I definitely recommend them. Oh boy. Yeah, I'm a little bit technologically challenged. I've got an incredible team that handles most of my tech stuff, but let's see.
Well, here, let me take this one for you then.
Okay.
I've been a listener of your podcast for quite some time now, and I find that a very valuable
thank you
resource.
for that, buddy. Thank you.
Absolutely.
That's really very kind of you to say that. Thank you.
So if they were asking me, that would be my answer.
Oh, that's very kind of you. Thank you.
Okay. Now, here's surely one you can answer. What book would you recommend to the listeners and why?
Oh, gosh. There's so many. It really depends on what someone's looking for. If they're looking for anything psychology related to get mindset, I love The Slight Edge. I love anything by Jack Canfield, anything by Tony Robbins. The One Thing with Gary Keller, the owner of Keller Williams. Yeah. There's tons of books that are great like that. What else? I like Jack Canfield, The Power of Focus, The Magic of Thinking Big. Those are great books that I've gifted a lot of. The Secret, of course, about the law of attraction. I never realized what it was, how I was getting all these things in my life, and it's the law of attraction, having the pictures, visualizing. And for multifamily, I think my book does a really good job. And it's free. So it's kind of crazy not to take advantage of it. It won't be free forever, by the way. I've just got my last testimonial, and I'm going to put it out on Amazon, and then I'm going to pull it from the website. But yeah, is that enough?
Yeah, absolutely. That answers everything very well. Well, Rod, we certainly appreciate all of your knowledge and insight and time today.
My pleasure. Yeah, if those of you listening enjoyed, check out my podcast as well. I'd be grateful. I think you'll get value, lifetime cash flow. And Jacob, I'm excited to see where you're headed. I know you're got nothing but incredible things ahead of you.
All right, thank you, Rod. So to sum it up, our listeners can text Rod at 41411 for a free ebook download of How to Create Lifetime Cash Flow through Real Estate Investing. It's not going to be free forever, so hurry up and do that. I'm sure it's a great content by Rod there. And Rod, where else can our listeners reach out to you and contact you if they'd like?
They can go to my website, rodkhleif.com. Talks about some of the things we're doing, and there's a ton of video there. I think I've got my blog. They're just adding the rest of them. Probably have about 60 videos on mindset and real estate, but it's RODKHLEIF as in Frank.com. So that'll add value. And I've got a YouTube channel. It's got a lot of videos as well.
Great. All right. Well, that is rodkhleif.com. and
Yep.
text 41411 for the free ebook. So thank you for coming on the show today, Rod, and have a great afternoon.
Thanks, buddy. Take care.
All right, that wraps up our interview with Rod. I hope you received a tremendous amount of value from speaking with him today. For a link to today's show notes and resources, please visit www.jacobayers.com/podcast. As always, if you'd like to contact me, feel free to reach me at www.jacobayers.com. And if you like this show, please subscribe and you'll be notified of all the new releases. And if you liked what you heard today, please leave me a rating and review in iTunes. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Real Estate Way to Wealth and Freedom podcast, providing you actionable content to build your real estate empire. Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for personal advice. The opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have a potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of the Real Estate Way to Wealth and Freedom, LLC, exclusively.